qualifiers is a challenge to us as well as something that we really think defines us at our best. And so we're doing, as we're now preparing for the piece that says, okay, where is God calling us into the future? We're engaged in a strategic direction process. And what that means is we're really going to say, God, okay, what does it mean for us to live out these values in the life of All Saints Church for the next 2, 3, 5 years? And that's going to be a process of not just deciding what God is calling us to do, but it's also discerning what is God calling us to lay aside. Because you can't do everything. You can't be everything to everybody. And then that will lead to a strategic planning process where we say, okay, now that we have the direction, we're going to set real goals and say, this is what we want to achieve in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. And we're going to do this together as a congregation. So to sort of prime the pump for this, we've been taking each month, May, June, July, August, we're taking one of those values each month and diving deep into it. I hope that you have heard the theme of radical inclusion in the preaching. And we're really taking this session of the forum to look at what radical inclusion means as a congregation and what it means to us. And I will say one of the things that I really love about that term, radical, and I got this from a South African theologian, Alan Aubrey Bosak, who wrote an amazing book called Radical Reconciliation, is he reminds me that the word radical has a double meaning. It does mean profound and extreme, but it also means at the root. Like those of you who are mathematicians know what a radical is. It's Latin students, there you go, excellent. And one of the things that I really believe made the inclusion radical in the way that the revolutionary Jesus was and is radical, it's really doing a power analysis. Because it's not saying here is a dominant group and we are going to include others into that group while maintaining the dominance of that group. That ends up being a lot more ornamentation than inclusion. Radical inclusion in the way Jesus exercised it was saying there is no dominant group. Everyone comes to the table. Everyone has a chance to influence and affect the culture. Everyone has, as they are and as they are becoming, a chance to take a full role in the community. And so it isn't, okay, it's like one of my least favorite words in the English language is tolerate. Toleration is not a Christian value. It's not, okay, we're going to let you be here. It is going to be, no, we want you to come here and who you are, change who we are. It is that Ubuntu of which Desmond Tutu talks about, is that we are, because you are. So, and actually I think, Barbara, you're going to have some things to say about that as we talk about Racial Justice Advisory Board and sort of how you all have been looking at that. So what I want to do is we started sitting down in this, and one of the wonderful things is this is not a comprehensive group in terms of the diversity of All Saints Church. It's about as many as we could fit on the stage. And so this really is a taste. And so what I'd love to do, and Hannah, why don't we just sort of start over here with you, is if you could introduce yourself, talk about a ministry or whatever that you represent, but then also talk about how have you experienced radical inclusion at All Saints Church. So.
Sure, thank you very much. So my name is Hannah Earnshaw. My pronouns are they, them. And I wear a number of different hats at All Saints Church, one of them being co-lead of the LGBTQ ministry. Happy Pride Month in advance, coming up. Keep an eye out. And I guess my experience of inclusion at All Saints and radical inclusion at All Saints kind of revolves around this identity, in that some of you may know when I moved from the UK, I was moving out of a charismatic evangelical church, and I was looking for somewhere that would be welcoming and affirming to LGBTQ people. So, I typed LGBTQ affirming church, Pasadena, into Google, and look what comes up. And what I was looking for was somewhere that I could introduce myself, as a non-binary queer person with my pronouns, and be welcomed and accepted, and, I'd be allowed to sit in and watch, and I was expecting the church to be very quiet on matters of gender and sexuality, because whenever I'd heard those things come up from the pulpit before, it had always been bad news. So I just wanted to go in and sort of sit at the back and, you know, be accepted and welcome, and things would be quiet. But what was really profound for me was hearing Mike preach and hearing the words come out of his mouth, sisters, brothers, and gender non-conforming siblings, as he addressed the church, and hearing myself, I wasn't just welcome, I was identified and acknowledged from the pulpit. I existed from the front of the church. That was unbelievably powerful to me, and I think it's a part of what is radical about the inclusion at All Saints. It's not just like, oh yeah, you're welcome, you can come sit here, we won't bother you, but it's like, no, you are here, we see you, we identify you as a part of this community. With all that you are, you belong here. And yeah, that I think is part of what makes radical inclusion radical here at All Saints.
Yeah. Barbara.
Good morning. My name is Barbara. My pronouns are she and her. My relationship to radical inclusion in this church has been primarily through the lens of being on the Racial Justice Advisory Board, which is an interesting place to sit in terms of if you may assume, oh, this is a place where we're going to have the loudest voice for inclusivity or belonging relating to race. And that's not necessarily the case. It's actually maybe one of the most challenging places to sit in the church to have those conversations, because we have a history of being seen, maybe from the outside as well as from the inside, as a progressive church. And the birth of a board that is intended to provide some guidance and some challenging questions to ourselves about how we live into anti-racism and belonging is uncomfortable, because it's uncomfortable to those of us who think, I have this figured out. I don't need guidance. I don't need someone to walk me through this. And I want to say that the Racial Justice Advisory Board, we don't exempt ourselves from needing guidance as well. I can't begin to understand what it's like to be a Black person in the church, to be an Asian person in the church, to be a white person in the church. So we consider ourselves as one, learning from one another and bringing different perspectives in so that we can provide guidance to the church overall. And that's not necessarily always comfortable for everyone in the church to hear that we may benefit from. So we continue to, with both a sense of accountability and grace, try to open up those conversations. And that's the primary relationship that I have to this topic in the church.
Yeah, thanks.
Good morning. My name is Flor Quintanilla, and I'm a member of the Latino community. Yeah. And just to hear the words of radical inclusion makes me, in this time, makes me feel like in my experience in All Saints Church is right now is a feeling it's a process of healing for myself and members, well, probably members of the Latino community, because it's like we have like in this community the goal to be part of the same body, the body of Christ, the body of God, but at the same time that the diversity makes sometimes feel like uncomfortable, yeah? So in the past, it's like trying to fit in this All Saints, and sometimes it works, sometimes doesn't, right? And working and working and doing, and we left behind the part of ourselves. And right now it's feel like healing process. It's like, oh yeah, this is a new, this is a transformation. It's more than a change. It's like a transformation. It's like, yeah, this church is a live church. We are part of this community, and is that's why is I see like in a process of seeing different things happen, and sometimes we don't like, sometimes we do like, and sometimes it's like, okay, accept how we are doing now. It's not something like, this is it, right? It's like, oh no, it's a transformation, and we are here to be part of this transformation.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Brenda. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm co-chair of the women's community. And I'm very happy to let you know that the women's community...
You hold the mic a little closer to your mouth. There you go.
That's much better. The women's community is defined as all women who attend All Saints Church. And so for me to speak about radical inclusion as a lawmaker in Michigan recently stated, I am white, straight, Christian, a mom, and a wife. And so my experience of radical inclusion is learning my privilege and making it possible for the privilege to extend in all directions. I'll just give this one example of when I had my first job as a social worker. My African American friend told me, "You're free, white, and 21. You can do anything." And that was a real wake-up for me, because I hadn't ever thought of life in those terms. And so to come to All Saints with the invitation that's always expressed that whoever you are and wherever you are, you're welcome here, that's radical. And the challenge for our organizations is to live it out and actually execute that outreach. So that's what we're here for, and that's what I encourage every woman who's got any interest at all in the women's community, please get in touch with me. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead and give that to Valentine. Valentine, you want to just introduce yourself and talk about your experience of welcome with Safe Haven here at All Saints.
Okay, my name is Valentin Flores. I came to this church like around 2007. By chance, I used to go to other churches, mainly evangelical Pentecostal churches, but I was passing here in front of the church by chance, and I was attracted first by the construction of the church, the building. It's beautiful, and then I discovered that they have the Spanish service, so I said, well, I go to see what happens here. And I like it. And also I discovered that this church is very involved, politically involved, and you know most of the churches, they are not involved in politics, but this church is very, very involved. So that's another thing I like it, because I said, well, they don't talk only about the Bible, and also they are involved in politics, and they fight for the people, which is good. So I began to come little by little, and I like the church, I like the service, and I feel very happy in this church for long time. And I will continue coming, because I see this church is also like very revolutionary church. This church is growing, is in expansion, and I think in the future is going to be bigger and very well because it's opening more and more and more to all kinds of thinkings, all kinds of thoughts. So I like this church and continue coming here.
Thank you so much, Valentin. Edie, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Edie Hovey, and I am chair of the Accessibility Ministry here. I've been the chair since 2016, and before that I was helping Karen Robles, who was the chair. Our mission and statement is that we advocate for and advise the church and community on how to provide full inclusion for persons with disabilities and their families, whether they're members or not. This includes identifying and helping to find solutions to physical communication, procedural and attitudinal barriers to full participation in all worship services, program, and events at All Saints. And that is an ongoing situation that we work with. Some things have been easy for us, and other things have been difficult. We have a brochure that has about 19 things listed of things that make everything more accessible for people with disabilities. We have wheelchair space pew cuts now, and I want to talk about that a little bit more later. And assistive listening devices. Our Maundy Thursday service, we now include washing of the feet. I mean, the hands as well as the feet, if that's more easy for somebody with a disability. And so we've been working at that for a very long time. You said you wanted stories, and so I have a story that I'm going to read that was written by Toby Pugh. This is way back when Ed Bacon was our rector, and we've lots of times gotten help and support from other people in the congregation. He's was a what do you call it? He was a, anyway, I'm trying to think of the word. He worked at Disney, and so he worked with accessibility issues. And so he wrote the story that was originally written in Matthew and Luke, the parable of the wedding banquet or the great dinner. And I won't read all of it because it's a little bit long, but just to sort of summarize, the kingdom of heaven is like this. There was a rector who prepared a feast for his congregation, but then he invited everybody, sent out workers, and the choir, the acolytes, and the assisting clergy and laity have been dressed and everything is ready and come to the feast. But they took no notice. People didn't come. Some of them went to their retirement home, another to business, and they went other places. The rector was furious and dispatched troops to tell those who castigated the workers that they should shape up, because everyone knew that they all welcome at this feast, whether they are or whether they find themselves on their spiritual journey, forgetting that a spiritual journey sometimes requires a physical journey. So then the rector said to the workers, the feast is ready, but go out and collect everybody, more people. So they did. And then the rector noticed that they came, but not everyone was able to be seated near the table. And he said, my friends, said the rector, why are you not sitting around the table? But the guests were silent because they were astonished that he did not notice that there was no place for their wheelchairs, for their walkers, for their crutches, or their canes, and even their assistive animals. So then at one point a minor prophet spoke up and said to the rector and his assistants, see, these people are bound hand and foot because of their infirmities, and we have thrown them all out into the darkness of the north transept, where there is much grumbling and wailing and gnashing of teeth. Many are called, but a few have frozen limbs, so they can't move to a place where they can see the table. Now here's the good news. As the rector relented and saw that he, like everyone else who was called to be included, was only temporarily able-bodied, and that physical inclusion was sometimes necessary for spiritual inclusion. So they went out and they told Ed that if you want to be part of history, meet us at the front row of the pews with your screwdriver and your wrench so that we can replace the fixed pew with easy movable cathedral chairs. For in so doing, we shall make room for many fine guests, as well as their wheelchairs and other assistive devices. So he dispatched his troops and removed the front pews to make the feast more accessible for those who needed extra assistance in moving. So that helped us get the accessibility that we have there. So in close, the gospel of the Savior who calls all to participate spiritually and physically.
Katie, thank you.
I think it's on. So my name is Monique Thomas. My pronouns are she and her. And I've been at All Saints for about 15 years, and I've done everything. I've been in many different roles. I just recently stepped down as senior warden. I ended my term and my term on vestry as well, so I get to just be a congregant now. I started out with the racial justice ministry, and so that was the first ministry that I really got involved with, and I was one of the authors myself with Edna Trigg and Johari DeWitt Rogers. We wrote the racial justice resolution and added a piece about, thank you, thank you. And that resolution led to the Racial Justice Advisory Board, and we thought it was really important to have that because if All Saints had all the answers around racial justice, we would have done it already. So we needed to pull this board together to advise the vestry in the church. And we have a lot of work to do in terms of racial justice, and we've been going through this journey with CCEJ. The vestry and staff have been going through trainings, and that will be rolled out to the rest of the congregation. But for me, what that's revealed is gaps, and I'll talk more about when we get into what needs to happen in terms of, as I was thinking about my remarks for today, there have been moments where I felt radical inclusion in terms of my racial identity. When we opened the church for Black Lives Matter protesters, that felt inclusive because we're not just this church on the hill. We are in this community, we're part of the community, and we're in this fight with you. So, some of the music and things that we've done as well. And having said that, I also feel that there's so much more, as I said, so much has been revealed in terms of how I personally feel in spaces sometimes and what we could do differently, and I'll talk more about that. I think in terms of racial or in radical inclusion for me as a recovering Baptist Catholic, that's been the most because I remember walking in my first Sunday, and it was the 4th of July Sunday. I've told this story before, and Ed was still the rector, and we were playing gospel music, and people were joyful in being here. It didn't feel like that it's Sunday and, check, went to church, took communion, people actually wanted to be here and felt joy. And it was, we were a social justice church. We were about the movement. And so for me, I felt like it was the first time in my life that I didn't have to, that my values weren't in conflict anymore, that I didn't have to put my more progressive political and social views to the side to enter into church. And so personally, that's where I felt the most in terms of radical inclusion. And again, with racial justice, we got some work to do.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ava King. My pronouns are she, her. I'm here from CYF, or Children, Youth, and Families. Woo, yeah. So my experience with All Saints is a little bit different because I did not pick this church. It was picked for me by my parents. And I've been here all my 17 years of life. And for me, what radical inclusion means for All Saints is to grow up in probably the most accepting community that I could have ever pictured. And it really only struck me once I was taken out of the community how radically inclusive, at least we try to be. And I'd grown up, and All Saints was a real normalizer of acceptance for me. And then I started to grow older, and I went to Catholic elementary and middle school, and I realized that not every church was like All Saints, and that women couldn't be priests somewhere, and that all my friends' parents were not as down with queerness as mine were. And it really struck me what a powerful community it was and how important that is for especially youth and young people growing up to have a community where you can come out and where you can be truly accepted for who you are. And ultimately, even though All Saints isn't perfect, and we still, as Monique put, have a lot of work to do. That's why I'm dedicated to this church, is because it's been a really powerful experience for me growing up and to see how that's not everyone's experience.
Wow. Thank you all. I really just want to throw it open now, really with kind of these sort of two questions. And then, actually, Barbara, why don't we just start with you? And it's like, can you just talk briefly about some of the work that the Racial Justice Advisory Board, some of the conversation that you all have been having around just the very term radical inclusion?
Okay, I'll be brief, but I'm going to invite you to close your eyes and take a breath and just be with yourself for a moment. I'm going to say that All Saints Church has a value of radical inclusion. And I'm going to ask you what kind of pictures came to mind for you and what your thoughts were. I think for many people, the thought might have been, yes, I want to be inclusive. I want to let people in. And that is obviously a wonderful sentiment, and that's what we reflect as a congregation outwardly into the community. You may also have been someone who thought, I wonder if that includes me. I wonder what it really means. I wonder if everyone in the church feels that way. I wonder if I'm invited in, whether or not I will be invited to stay. And, you know, just thinking about those two potential responses, and of course there are many more, it gives you a sense of the power dynamic that can be perceived with inclusivity. And Mike did a great job of explaining that it could be interpreted many different ways. But when we think about how social conditioning is something we've all experienced, it reminds us that words are important, and it reminds us that in order to practice this, no matter what terms we use, we have to be mindful of how we've been conditioned. If I am the one opening the door and inviting you in and setting the table, it is the materials that I have in my home. It is the food that I have historically eaten. And you know that you are not at home necessarily. You might really enjoy it. You might enjoy, my Mexican meal. You might really be curious about it, like it, enjoy it. But you know that you're not necessarily at your home. It's not a table that we set together. There are academics that have been talking about alternative terms to inclusion that kind of strip it of that power dynamic. Belonging is one of them, and I think there's openness to other terms, but it's something I think we want to think about as a congregation. At minimum, think about how I am interpreting it and how I'm acting it out consciously or unconsciously in this community. And I think it's one thing we need to do in order to do that effectively is recognize there's us in relationship to the rest of the world, and then there's us in relationship to each other. And I think we all know of the concept of making sure your own house is in order before you engage. And we do a lot of amazing things outside the church walls, but we will do them even more effectively if we relate to each other in a truly belonging fashion inside the church.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you. It's just, I just want to say I'm so grateful to the Racial Justice Advisory Board and Chase and your work with them, and just that these conversations are happening, that we're not just taking a word and saying, oh yeah, but we're saying, okay, what does this really mean? And I don't think there's any situation that a power analysis is not helpful. I think it's incredibly important. So I want to just open this up and say, let's sort of talk about what are some of the barriers to radical inclusion or radical belonging. Some of you have said there's still work to do. What is some of the work that we have left to do? Monique.
If I can jump on with Barbara, and because I think that's been part of my challenge, and even me, I do this work and I'm a person of color, and I've had to reframe my thinking about inclusion. Because I think we think of it in terms of here's the dominant culture, here's the dominant model, and how do we ornament that with diversity, right? And what it really requires, I think of it like a Christmas tree. You've got the green Christmas tree and you put the lights and the ornaments and everything else on, but the tree is still green, that is still the root. How do we deconstruct that notion and start almost with a blank page and go, okay, I'm creating this event, I'm creating this is the goal of what I want people to take from this and the experience. What are the components that I need to create that? And really taking, deconstructing that idea of starting centered in whiteness, right? I think about even today, I don't know, how many of you went to 9 o'clock service? If you're going to 11:30, get ready, it's gonna be awesome. But I think about when Jenny TC, I love Jenny, and all the incredible things that she's done with music, and I think she has a little bit more leeway because she works with youth, and people are like, oh, well, that's a little more progressive, well, that's the youth, you know, and so you can kind of get away from canon in that way. But just incorporating things like hip hop into the music, incorporating drumming. If we're doing a traditional South African song, having traditional drumming and African people drumming and having, right? So really not just that we are going to be an inclusive church and include different types of music and perspectives, but who are the actual people playing the music? Who are the actual people in the room? How do we deconstruct the notion of what is Episcopal, right? How do we do that? So I think it's really, and that's what I want to challenge everyone to do in terms of radical inclusion is deconstructing. Radical inclusion is decentering and decentralizing whiteness. And that is a challenge, and that's hard to do, and that's been even challenging for me and my perspectives. But I think that's something that I'm really excited about, and that was one of my big aha moments from going through CCEJ is, wow, I also reinforce some of these power dynamics and structures as well, and how do I deconstruct them? And how do I have conversations with others about that? So that's one of the things that I think, that's one of the barriers I think for me is that we can't get away from this centralized notion of very masculine, very white-centered power and ways of celebration. That it's not about tolerating other people. I'm gonna, inviting you, but it's celebrating and celebrating them equally. That you're not just, I'm gonna invite you in because I'm trying to be diverse this month, but no, we are equally a part of this table. And how do we create and co-create this together?
Who else? Really big. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to build on something I think Barbara kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, which is the idea, the kind of dangerous complacency that can come from thinking, I attend a progressive church, therefore I am progressive. Done. And I guess challenging ourselves to remember that a church is not just, the guy at the front saying words and us listening. That the church is all of us. It is all of us in community. And if we are to be a radically inclusive church, each one of us also has to buy into that. And I mentioned before about the power of kind of hearing yourself sort of named and identified from the pulpit, but also what comes with that is then how do we respond when it is someone else being named or identified? Like, if the voices of Black people are being raised up at the front, there's a temptation for me to sit back and go, well, you're not talking about me. Or to go like, oh, well, you're making me the bad guy here, like this isn't serving my spiritual needs or something like that. But the challenge, I guess, for us listening to when other people are being raised up is to recognize it's not other people, it's us, it's all of us. When Black people are being raised up, when queer people are being raised up, when disabled people are being raised up, that's not someone else. That's not, okay, I can switch off, that's someone else. That's us. We all have to listen and buy into that and acknowledge that as part of ourselves, as the body of Christ.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, what Hannah said reminds me of a conversation that I was having in my English class about how there hardly is ever a situation in which a proclamation of allyship is important in the sense that, like, I was watching, that comes out wrong, but I was watching this TV show, and there was this character who came up to the table, and they had this conversation, and at the end, she went, I'm not homophobic, I'm an ally. And the other character responded, thank you for your service, a little bit sarcastically. And I thought that was an excellent representation of, right, we can proclaim ourselves as radically inclusive, right? But if our pews and our staff and our vestry and everything else doesn't represent that, then there's a disconnect there. And we can proclaim ourselves as whatever we want to be, but ultimately, everyone involved should feel that we are radically inclusive, and that's what should make it of value.
Good. What else? That reminds me of, like, you can't give yourself a nickname. And you can't call yourself an ally or whatever. Someone else gets to name you as that. And so in many ways, we can't name ourselves radically inclusive. It is up to others to say, yes, this is our experience, and this is what this means. So, yeah, thank you. So, other thoughts? Brenda.
Yes, I'd like to just add that we're all coming out of these years of isolation, and it's almost like if I'm coming to church in person, it's like I'm got to make sure I'm not in my pajamas, because that's how I've experienced church for the last couple of years. And I can only imagine that we're all feeling our way into social engagement again. And it's difficult enough even with people that we have known and loved and spent time with before. And so I think we need to sort of take deep breaths and reconnect, but also recognize it's a time to connect with people we may not have communicated with or reached out to before, because they're probably feeling the same way. And I know I feel lonely. I've had friends that ghosted me during the pandemic, and so I don't think that's unique to me. One of the things with women's community is we really want to have ambassadors out there when we have large events to welcome people, especially people that we don't recognize right away, and make sure that they feel that we're glad to have them and we want them to be part of us.
Thank you. We're at time, and I want to say thank you to Brenda. Thank you to all of you. This really is a continuing conversation, and part of what's going to happen is we're all going to continue it together in September. When we come back, and when we're all together again, when I'm back from sabbatical, that's when we are going to have conversation sessions and listening sessions for the strategic direction process, and they're going to be centered on these values. And so think about, journal, do whatever works for you about these values, about where you see yourself, where you see All Saints Church. And this fall, we're going to be doing some really exciting work about saying, where is God calling us more deeply? And I think you've heard just a taste of that this morning. So thank you for being here. Can we give just a big thank you to our panelists? Thank you. Okay, thanks a lot.